Dr. Jazz.
Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Please.
You know, you've played in Slovenia so many times. I think also in Maribor, if I'm not mistaken. I saw you.
Maribor, yeah, that's been a while.
Yeah. And you know, my friend David Brown gave me like so many CDs of yours in the beginning. He's the promoter.
Wow.
And then I listened to all of that stuff, and you know, beautiful playing. And you know, I just want to start this talk by I checked your schedule for this year, and you seem to be really busy with so many different groups. But I saw that you're gonna play first with Kirk Knofke.
Yes.
And how did you guys meet, actually?
Well, that's a funny story. We didn't know each other, and but Butch Morris brought us together, the cornet player, and later on he became known for his conductions.
Yeah.
And Butch, Kirk Knofke worked with Butch in many on many occasions, and Butch often said to him, "You should meet Ab Baars. I think you two should would do wonderful together." And he said the same thing to me. You should meet Kirk Knofke. And we didn't know each other. And then we met once at the BIM house, and we told this story to one another. And, so now it's finally going to happen after, well, Butch died in, I think, 2015 or 14, I'm not sure. And he is in Denmark or Norway sometimes. So we combined his touring with some work over here. So we have three little concerts, and I'm really looking forward, because he's a beautiful player and a nice person, from what I understand. So
I think it's going to be a nice combo, sound-wise also, you know, you and...
I love the cornet. Such a great instrument. And there aren't that many players that play the cornet.
Yeah, very
right. Bobby Bradford, of course. And
Graham Haynes.
Some great cornet players.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Are you just going to be improvising or writing? Are you writing some stuff or some tunes, or?
No, I thought about doing some John Carter stuff.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
Some duo pieces that he wrote for the duo with Bobby Bradford. I'm not sure yet, but it's cooking a bit in the head.
Yeah, you should record something also. I mean, it would be nice. A live gig or something. So
yeah.
Would be nice to hear then that. Otherwise, you're so busy with so many different groups, and you know, one other group I wanted to ask you was with Bill Elgert and Meinrad Knier. Are you guys still doing something? I think it's this year, right?
It's Meinrad Knier's ID. Meinrad is the bass player, and we play, I think, 3 or 4 times a year, and that for more than 10 years already. And it's a fun group.
I love Bill.
We come together and improvise, and then we go home, and a year later we hook up again and play a few concerts. But it's the funny thing is that it's growing. Every time we meet, there's new music, and everybody band is developing still, coming up with new ideas, and every time it's fresh, and yeah, it's really fun. And mostly we work in Germany, Berlin and surroundings of Berlin. So yeah, it's a nice group, and I think we made 2 or 3 CDs already.
Beautiful stuff. I love it. But you know, I wanted to go back a little today also, and you know, I've spoken to quite some guys from the Dutch scene already, and you know, I've been following, you know, have albums of everyone from the ICP Orchestra and itself and yours, and it's I think the Dutch scene developed quite a special language within Europe and worldwide regarding the improvised world. And how were your beginnings? Who was the main impetus, the main, you know, reason why you started actually to investigate improvisation, like I guess in the 70s, or how did that happen for you?
Ooh, that's a long story.
Oh yeah, please, come on, that's why we're here.
I think in high school, no, I started playing the piano when I was 7 or 8.
Right.
My mother wanted me to take music lessons. She was an organ player herself. She used to play in the church, and she had 3 brothers who never had actual music lessons, but they all played an instrument. So whenever she would come back from her organ lessons, they would ask her everything about scales and these kind of things. And my mother said, you should play an instrument, because that's nice. When there is a little party, you can play some piano or guitar.
Yeah.
And so I was taking piano lessons until I was 12 or 13, I think. And one of her brothers played the tenor saxophone.
Oh, okay.
And I got fascinated with the instruments. And in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, you had those wonderful bands that had tenor saxophone in it. Bands like Chicago, Coliseum with Dick Hextall-Smith, the Blood, Sweat and Tears. And I really loved the instrument. So my uncle, my mother's brother, he always had a second old saxophone that he sometimes gave to people who wanted to play the saxophone. And so I got that saxophone and started to play on it. And for one reason, I didn't want to take lessons, because I had 4 or 5 years of piano lessons. And whenever I was on school during the music lessons, there was a friend of mine, and he always would sit down at the piano and play the latest hits from all well-known pop groups. And he could play boogie woogie and blues. And I said, man, where did you learn all this? He said, well, I listen to the radio and then I sit down and figure it out. And I said, can you read notes? No, that's not necessary, he said. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And I never could do that. I listened to the radio and I didn't know how to figure out things. I always needed paper in front of me, and I couldn't get loose from the paper. And I thought, if I want to improvise, I should get rid of reading notes. So it took a long time before I actually took saxophone lessons. And so yeah, that's an interesting how do you say that? An interesting thing that music paper can be in the way
Oh man,
of
absolutely.
a free mind, and yeah. And then I lived in an industrial town. Philips was the major company, Philips,
Yeah.
that's facing such a lot of problems these days. At that time, they had their own marching band called the Philips Harmony, and whenever there came presidents or ministers from other countries, we had to show up and play the national hymns. We would play at the soccer team, at the soccer games of the soccer club PSV, which was
you're Eindhoven. Okay. Yeah.
and financed by Philips. I would get paid. We had 3 uniforms, and we would play all sorts of things, from symphonies to Benny Goodman to hip arrangements. And my mother said, you should go there. And I didn't want to go at all. I didn't see myself walking in this costume, and I thought it was ridiculous. But then she was so convincing that I decided to do it. So then I got lessons from one of the saxophone players of the saxophone section. And then I had after that, I decided to go to the conservatory. And yeah, that's where it started. And the conservatory was in Rotterdam.
Oh, okay.
And that's where Butch Morris lived at that time. He was visiting Holland quite often and stayed there for longer periods of time. So this must be late 70s, 78, 79. And Butch would do workshops, and we would invite him in a band that we had with a few musicians from Rotterdam. And I also had a little quartet with bass player Ernst Glerem, drummer Martin van Duynhoven, and Butch and me. We would do a little tour in Holland. And so yeah, he was very important in feeding my musical world, and very inspiring, and yeah, a real dear friend, a special friend. And we used to talk a lot and hang and fantasize about a lot of things. So that's how I got to know Butch Morris.
Yeah.
And from then on, yeah, things developed. I moved to Amsterdam because that's where most of my colleagues were living, and there was the old BIM house, which was at that time really a wild place where a lot of plans were being made, where you could hear great music. It was a university for not only improvised music, but also for older jazz forms. I heard Charles Mingus play there, Art Blakey, all of the great musicians that were coming by, but also Han Bennick and Misha Mengelberg as a duo, Steve Lacy.
Yeah.
Well, you name it. They all
everyone played. Yeah. I mean, I think you established quite a strong relationship with Misha, right? And how did that story with him begin?
I think when I was living in Rotterdam, some musicians invited him for a little project, and we had all crazy ideas about using classical music and improvising on that. And yeah, we had some themes from famous classical pieces and worked on that. And Misha was a guest, and I think he didn't like it at all. He was he didn't like I think the things we did. Then early 80s, he was looking for new musicians in the ICP Orchestra because he had, I think, serious ideas about writing more composed music, and he needed people who were able to read. And some of the ICP players like Walter Wierbos, trombonist Walter Wierbos, and Michael Moore and Han Bennick suggested Misha should ask me for the band. And I think he hesitated a bit. But then I think in 85, I was invited to join the ICP. Okay. And yeah, that was interesting because I was developing a personal language at that time, thinking about how to develop that. And the first concert we played a piece by Thelonious Monk, Reflections. It's a ballad. And I had studied the form of the piece, the chord progression, and I tried to play as good as I could over the chord changes, and I think it went fine. And after the concert, Misha came up to me and said, Ab, listen, you don't have to play it that way. And that really opened, no, it didn't open it gave me confidence that I could continue with the way I was thinking about improvising. Because I had the idea of relating to more traditional material in an open way, referring to the melody, but going in and out, and I didn't know how to do that. And I think Misha sort of felt what I was trying to do. So that remark meant a lot to me and gave me confidence to go on with that search, and it helped me a lot. And yeah, so that was an important remark from Misha. Yeah. And after that, Misha did the project on the music of Duke Ellington and the music of Thelonious Monk. Yeah. He had already done the Herbie Nichols project. And so I approached the more traditional pieces with that idea of going out and going in and going out. And yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that, and it really helped me shaping my language.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned your sound. Like, how did you? I think you have quite a recognizable sound in the world of improvised music. You know, on the way you improvise. How did you develop that through the years? Then after this mid-80s, starting with the ICP.
Well, I think from the very first day I had a saxophone, I was working on my sound. First of all, I love to play long notes. Yeah. So I start every time I pick up my clarinet or the saxophone or even the shakuhachi, I start playing long notes. And I remember when I was studying in Rotterdam at the conservatory, I would walk home, and there was one moment when there was a car stopping at the traffic lights, and the car had such an amazing sound. So I ran to the car because it was quite a distance, just to hear the sound. It had a beautiful density. Have my saxophone sound like that.
Mm.
So I've always been looking and searching and trying things with my breathing, with my exercises, with my stomach, and just to work on the color of the, and it's always imitating other saxophone players or clarinet players is a big part of that. And little by little, you get more into a personal sound. And I still love to do that. And well, with the shakuhachi, it's a well-known tradition that you play. It's called robuki, which is long notes on the lowest note of the shakuhachi. You just play as loud as you can and as long as you can, and traditionally you do it in an standing in an ice cold sea, or under a waterfall, or in the snow. Because besides playing just that long note, it's also a philosophical thing, or a Zen Buddhist idea about becoming a unity with the sound and with your mind. So these are all interesting ways of approaching playing long notes. Yeah,
interesting. Like when establishing, your sound and studying, you mentioned already before John Carter. How did you make the connection with him? And you were already kind of part of the scene and making gigs with the ICP, but you went to study with him then. Like, how did that happen? And
well, when I was studying at the conservatory in Rotterdam, I had to choose a second instrument. Besides piano, you also should play another instrument. And everybody was playing bass clarinet. That was really hip at that time. And I thought, well, bass clarinet, that's not my thing. And I thought perhaps B-flat clarinet, but I didn't like the sound of most players. But at that time, I started to listen to the Ellington Band. There were these great clarinet players coming from the New Orleans tradition. Had a big dark sound like Russell Prokop or Barney Bigard, and I really fell in love with that. And I thought, well, let's do clarinet. So I had clarinet lessons, but I really had problems with the clarinet because I played it as if it was a tenor saxophone. And a clarinet is such a different instrument, because if only for the change of octaves, a tenor saxophone, you use the mechanic to go to another register after 8 notes after an octave, and then you push the octave button, and then you can play in the higher register. But on the clarinet, it's different. You don't go after an octave, but after an octave and a fifth. And so instead of if you play a C and you push the octave button, then you have another C an octave up. And with the clarinet, that doesn't work, because you only push the button if you are an octave and a fifth above below C. And that's really confusing. Plus the whole embouchure thing, the whole way you keep your fingers, it's way more delicate, and you really have to be aware of the specific characteristics of the clarinet. And then I heard John Carter, and I read an interview with him in a wonderful magazine called Coda magazine, a Canadian magazine. And he mentioned the Woodwind College, which was a little something where he would rehearse and where he would do workshops and where he would give lessons. And I happened to meet him in Nickelsdorf. Where he was playing at the famous Nickelsdorf festival, the Confrontationen. And I said I wanted to, if it was possible, to study with him. And he said, sure, yeah. And so I applied for a grant with the Dutch government, and I got it. And I was able to study with John for, I think, 3 or 4 months in Los Angeles.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that was amazing, and a very dear period in my life. And unfortunately, John left us in 1991. I think of him almost every day when I pick up the clarinet, and there's a photo hanging on the wall of him. So he's still an important person in my life and in my music.
Still play his music also. I mean, the compositions you did, Free Fall, I think. That's important.
Such beautiful music, and
you mentioned the ICP Orchestra. How important in your eyes is that structure? And I think you guys traveled all over the world. I mean, in general for the Dutch scene, but also for you personally. Was that the first time you kind of started to travel around in Europe with those?
Yes, it was the first time.
How was that experience like for you? I mean, traveling around and.
Well, it's great to travel. I love traveling and meet other people and see and experience different worlds and look from that experience your own life. And what was inspiring was the appreciation of the music all over the world. And what surprised me was, especially in the United States, which I thought was the birthplace of the music we were making. And I really enjoy playing in the States, because they are so happy to hear music from Europe, and the specific way we make our own version of something that's coming from another culture. yeah, that was inspiring to experience that.
Yeah. You mentioned the US also. I wanted to ask you, like, how did you make all these connections? You know, you played with Steve Lacy and Roswell Rod, all these amazing greats, and Ken Vandermark later. And how did all these connections with the US musicians happen?
Well, I think also through the ICP Orchestra, okay. Because Misha and Han, the ICP means Instant Composers Pool. Yeah. So it's a pool, and Misha had the idea that there's always chairs open chairs for whoever is part of the family. So whenever Steve Lacy would be in Amsterdam and the ICP would have a concert, Misha would say, "Oh, Steve, come by," and the same for George Lewis, or Roswell Rudd, or Lee Konitz would also join the ICP.
Oh, really? Oh, wow, that's amazing.
So, yeah, I thought that was very special about Misha, that in his eyes there were no limitations in music, and there are so many interesting people or interesting musicians that and there's such a lot of great music, so why not invite those people and have a fun evening with them? And so, and through the ICP I got to know all these musicians, and I was able to invite them for my own projects, and you
think there's a you think there's a different you know, I played with many times in the US with American musicians and with European improvisers. You think in your ears and eyes there's a difference between the Americans and Europeans in the way they improvise, or not really? I mean,
no, not in the way they improvise. I think I have the feeling the dedication to the life of being a musician and what it means, and the search and the difficulties you face, was different, perhaps is still different in the United States. And because living in the States is really hard, being poor, and I think you have to fight harder to survive, and I think that speaks through the music, and it's I guess it has to do something with that.
Different.
In order to be heard and to be played and to be able to play is more difficult, because the consequences if you make no money are way tougher in the States, I think, than in Europe. And
it's different. I know what you mean. I just like this, the attitude also, the way we live in Europe and in the States, it's different. That's what I experienced. It's just like culturally, I guess, connected also. So in the midst of all your work, I wanted to ask you also of you being a band leader, and you know, you've done so much work as a band leader, and how did that start? And you being in that role, you know, I know you have the trio with Martin and Wilbert, like already for 30 years, I think, right? And how did you develop in your role as a band leader, and how did you, when was the moment you said, like, okay, I think you did Carroussel, right, in the 80s, your first one, that you want to start leading bands?
Well, I think that's that's something that happened naturally.
You like that role, otherwise?
What's that?
You like the role of being a band leader? I mean, some people are like, ugh, but I think in your case, you seem to.
Oh, I like to compose and to write music, and yeah, and then perform them with musicians that I like working with.
Yeah.
And yeah, it felt like if you want to hear your own music, you have to organize that and put together a band. And it's a long process of learning, of falling down and getting up, and because in the beginning I found it very difficult to rehearse a piece that I wrote, and I had this feeling that well, this is what I wrote, they will know what to do with it. And then it turned out that there were these horrible concerts where I was just guessing what to do and where to go. And,
yeah, that's right.
And then I started learning to write music that was interesting for improvisers to work on.
Yeah.
And I started to learn how to explain sometimes what I had on my mind, what the character or the if a piece is good, then you don't have to explain that.
Yeah.
And I learned to work with ideas of the musicians you work with, because that's
important. Yeah.
Something you have to learn too. That's really important, and that it can be really inspiring to work with the input of all the other musicians. But most important is to have a basic idea yourself about what you want to do with the piece, what it is about, and how you want to develop it. And you get better and better about developing this idea, and for that reason you are getting stronger or better in accepting, in working with the input of other musicians. And after a while, it's even the fun part of playing a concert, having the input of other musicians and building something together, and knowing that they trust you and you trust them, and when something goes wrong, that you can depend on the other catching you and helping you, and vice versa. And that's the great thing about improvising together, that there's trust and adventure and ideas and little conversations, and knowing that all people on stage and in the audience are joining you and helping.
It's one big circle. Yeah, I mean one. Yeah. How do you compose usually? I mean, you mentioned composition. Like, how did you start composing? And I mean, even now, do you do it like on the horn, on the clarinet, or?
Depends. I sit down. Sometimes I write with no instruments. Just sit down and write something. And sometimes I practice and have the tenor, and I write something on the tenor or the clarinet or the shakuhachi. And I need a reason to compose. So whenever there's a series of concerts coming up, or even just one concert, I might scribble down something, and now I'm working on new material for the trio that I have with a tuba and
I saw that. Yeah,
trombone. So I'm really into it and composing every day, trying to sit down
oh wow, okay,
at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock and just be a few hours with my music, stay close to the instruments. And the fun part is that I might write something on clarinet, and then I sit at the piano and try to find other voices. And then I try it on tenor saxophone, and it works different.
Yeah.
Or I might try it on shakuhachi, and then it becomes something different. So it's never a fixed thing. It's changing all the time, and little by little, it becomes something that's more or less ready for working on it with more people and using it as a tool for the improvisation.
Yeah. How do you know when a piece is ready? I mean,
well, there's ready and ready.
yeah. Okay.
I think I still compose way too much, and
yeah, I'm the same. Yeah.
I often finish. I sometimes compose in a way that's completely locked. That I have a beautiful little this or that, and when I start working with it, that I realize, oh boy, this is not good, because there's no reason to improvise. It's finished in itself, and there's no reason for other musicians to do something with it. So then I start erasing things, and just before the end, I might throw it away, and that's something I learned from Misha Mengelberg. He was able to write those gorgeous compositions that were almost always, it was a lot of fun to take it apart, and there were so many points of reference that you could work with, and I think that's because it's open material. There's the possibility to improvise with it and pick little something from the material and work with it. And so that's what I try to do too. And sometimes I might just write down a melody for myself and say to Martin and Wilbert, okay, find your own way. This is the idea. It's ballad-like or it's up-tempo-like. And I know Wilbert, he has such big ears. He will find his own way, and it's still beautiful and even better than what I might have written down for him. And sometimes I want to hear something more specific, so I might write down a line for all three of us, or even in the ICP when I write for, that's a 10-piece band.
Yeah.
So I might write down a voice for all 10, but there can be times that I just write something for the clarinets and give some little instructions, no notes, but little instructions to try this or try that. And that's, so there's many ways, options.
Yeah, no, it's nice if you play, you've played with these people already for 30 years or even more. Also in the ICP, there are so many guys. Your generation seems to be so connected, and which is great, you know each other, and when you write what to expect from, it's easier, I guess, to do that. But I also wanted to ask you, just not to take too much of your time, so how did you meet your wife, and how does, you know, I talked with Steve Swallow the other day, and you know, him and Carla, they are both, you know, composers and musicians, and you guys too, like, do you guys talk about composition? Do you improvise at home together also? Like, how does it work with you? And when did you meet Ike? I mean, like, how did that happen actually?
I moved to Amsterdam in when did 83
Already, wow, okay.
1983, and I was taking counterpoint lessons with a bass player, composer, bass player, classical bass player, composer, and so I would go to the lesson, and often before or after my lesson, Ich would come, because she was also taking lessons. She started composing for an all-women's rock band she was working with.
Oh, wow,
and
okay.
wanted to know more about composing too. So that's where we met, and then at the old BIM house, we met at the bar or at concerts sometimes. And yeah, that's how we met. And yes, we do play together. That happened in 1999. We really wanted to live somewhere else for a while, just to experience being away from Amsterdam, from the life we have here. And after thinking about different places, we thought about Berlin first, Istanbul or Paris. But I happened to have some concerts in Italy with the ICP Orchestra in Rome, and she decided to join me, and we would take a little holiday, staying in Rome for a few days. And when we came back, we said, why don't we live in Rome? Because we really loved it. And so we went back, and we lived in Rome for half a year in 1999. And that was at the time that Mario Schiano, saxophone player, organizer, maestro, inspiration for the Italian jazz and improvised music scene. He had this little festival, Controindicazione. And he said to us, well, since you are here, why don't you play at the festival as a duo? We said, no. We are living together. We are having a relation. We are not going to perform as a duo. And he kept on pushing us. And finally we said, okay. And it was fun, but in the beginning it was difficult too.
Yeah.
Because we share so much, and now we were also sharing something very precious and very personal. So we had some, we prepared a program for the festival, and people really enjoyed it, and we enjoyed it too. So we decided to do more concerts in the future, and out of that came well, really one of my favorite duos, and we write for it, but there's also times that we just improvise, and yeah, it's so special and so deep, and yeah, we don't need words, we hear sound, and we talk, and yeah, it's really special.
Yeah, you connected also with Ingrid and Tom, right? Did you do like a tour? Or
yes.
Yeah, so it's a funny comment. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, we even thought about that's long time ago, about organizing a festival for couples.
Oh wow, that would be cool.
10 years ago. And we had a whole list of couples in improvised music, jazz and improvised music. Yeah. And I had been working with Ingrid in various bands. And one time, Tom Rainey played at the BIM House. And Ich is a great fan of Tom's playing. And they met. And after the concert, we met at the bar, and Ich started talking to Tom, telling how much she liked his music and his playing. And I think Tom knew some CDs of Ich too, and they connected really well. And Ich said, why don't we do a quartet with two couples? And well, yeah, then it started. So we started off with a big European tour, and the very first concert was at Tampere Jazz Festival.
Yeah.
And it was recorded that we had never ever played together as a quartet, and we jumped on stage and played, and this really beautiful CD came out of it. And now we are working, almost finished, a second CD.
Beautiful. Okay.
That we recorded in 2018, and it will be released pretty soon on the Wig label. It's number 33, Wig 33. And that's also all improvised. And often people ask us, how did you compose this piece? Or did you write that down? And that's the amazing thing about this band, that it sounds like it sounds like it's composed and that we are using written material. But yeah, it's really special.
Beautiful that you're doing, still continuing with that group. Yeah, I love Tom. You know, he's I played with him quite a lot, and you know the trio he has that with Mary Halverson and Ingrid. Yeah. That also it's completely improvised, but it sounds like at some moments like, man, like when did you write that down? And it's like, yeah, the same with you guys.
When did you write that down?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
But cool. Ab, I'll leave you a nice, what is today? Wednesday. I'm completely lost in time. So, nice afternoon. But man, I have to do this one with Ich also. You have to tell her. I'll send you.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
Email. You know, I have her stuff as well. So, so.